How do we equip our families with a biblical worldview? How do we prepare the next generation for life? How do I grow in my walk with the Lord and in my marriage? If you wrestle with these questions, you are in the right place to find answers. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford, and today I am interviewing Patrick Prill. Patrick is the author of Things Atheists Say That Simply Make No Sense. It's a delightful apologetics work that is very engaging, very approachable, and so check out this conversation with Patrick because you will be encouraged by it. But before we start our interview, this episode is brought to you by my book, Leading Well at Home, How Husbands and Fathers Can Biblically Lead Their Families. So have you ever thought, I want to be a godly husband or father, but I don't know where to start? Have you ever heard that you need to do something to equip your family, but didn't know how to begin? Well, if so, Leading Well at Home will show you how you can love Jesus Christ, love and serve your wife and children, and take responsibility for discipling your family. You'll be encouraged and given action steps that you can apply so that you're moving forward. You can buy it online through our website at entrustingthefaith.com or leadingwellathome.com or anywhere books are sold online. You can also get a free excerpt on our website. All that information is in the show notes so you can check it out. Now, let's jump into today's interview. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be a part of this.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I love the title. That is a wonderful title. So what was the impetus for writing it? What led you to it?
Well, I had retired from working and, I had originally planned on writing books on economics and morality and other subjects that I had interest in. But what I found was my kids were coming home with the subject of atheism. In one case, it was a girl who was claiming that morality didn't exist because God didn't exist. And in another case, it was one of my son's friends inviting him to the Reason rally in Washington, D.C. So, when you're being encountered by, I guess, in a way, encroachments of atheism into your kids' lives, or at least it's knocking on the door. You have the choice of really ignoring it, engaging it, getting angry, doing something. So I chose to engage it. So I actually started reading some of the things that popular atheists were saying. And the thing that really surprised me was even those which have PhDs by their name were saying things that were absolutely nonsensical. And I found that I was actually pretty incredulous at the things that they were saying. And I just felt like somebody needed to respond to this, not just from the standpoint of, some academic exercise, but really for our kids, giving them the ability to crisply, concisely understand what the atheist is really saying. And then how do I respond to that? So that's why I wrote the book.
Oh, that makes sense. It's trying to equip kids, equip young people and adults with a way to think and reason against these atheistic arguments, it sounds like. Just really an equipping exercise in many respects.
Yeah, and I found that, there's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of great resources. But my kids weren't going to read a 400-page book on the cell's design. My kids weren't going to read, the 20 books that I would recommend to them. And the thing I find is that most people really have about pick a number, 3 to 10 minute attention span. If you can't get an idea across fairly crisply, simply, concisely within a relatively short period of time, you're going to lose them. So that's what I really try to do, is just try to read a lot of material. And I have easily 200 books on my bookcase and probably almost that same number as PDFs that I've had to absorb to try to respond to all this. But I just try to provide crisp, reasoned responses so that they don't have to spend the time reading 200 books.
So you really distilled it down to sort of that essence of here's their argument, but let's look at it and say, okay, and here's how you answer that. Because at the end of the day, their argument, that atheistic position, really, it doesn't hold water. It's not logical.
No, and the thing I found also is that a lot of these people are actually college professors. So these are people that they're actually going to be encountering in classes. These are the people and the arguments that they're going to have to try to respond to. And most college students, especially freshmen and sophomores, they're not going to take their professors to task over what they say. They're too intimidated.
That's a good point. Yeah, because once you walk into that university setting, you're 18, you're 19, everything is huge, and it's definitely that authority figure and their reasoning that carries a lot of weight, whether it's right or not.
Exactly.
Wow. Now, one of the things in the book, you start with an atheist observation. So not all books, as in terms of apologetics, not everybody starts off with this idea of, okay, here's what the atheists say. Here's their statement. What was sort of the design behind starting with the atheist in this case?
There were a couple of reasons for that. One was just for the brevity of time. I knew that people will only give you a certain amount of time. And if you can't communicate it clearly in a short period of time, as I said before, they're not going to really, I guess, stick with you. The other reason was there's a lot of great books out there, and there's phenomenal apologetics resources, but I couldn't find the book that really responds to what atheists are actually saying. They respond to what atheists aren't saying. In some cases, they'll be giving, a great historical presentation for the historicity of Jesus in the Bible. Okay. But if that's not what Richard Dawkins is talking about, then you just read the wrong book. So what I'm really trying to do is, again, just give them the resources, the tools that they need to understand and respond to what atheists are actually saying, not what they're not saying.
So very much when they're in a classroom and they hear this statement, they then have a defense, an argument, some type of framework that they can use with that statement instead of having to sort of weave their way to that logical conclusion.
Yeah, and I actually started with Richard Dawkins, Anthony Flew, and Christopher Hitchens. Richard Dawkins, because his book, The God Delusion, has sold 3.3 million copies. It's pretty astonishing. Sam Harris, I included in that group because he sold several 100,000 books. And so, again, these are the books that young people are reading. These are the books that are making very, very brash, bold, provocative claims very confidently. But a confident assertion doesn't mean that you're correct.
It's true. Just because you say something is true doesn't mean it's real. You can step off that cliff and say, I'm not going to fall, but that doesn't mean gravity is not going to take hold.
Well, and if you say it loudly, frequently, and angrily, that doesn't really, mean that it's actually factual. So
no.
So those are the ones that I really started with. And as I did, I spread out to a variety of other people. And again, I was continually amazed. I was amazed by the things that they were saying, how poorly researched that they were, how brash the contentions were, how nonsensical they were when you actually thought about them. But that the average, 18 to 22-year-old doesn't have the tools to sort through it and to really come to grips with that. And the average parent doesn't have the time either. So those are really the two audiences that I was going for, were parents who have a shortage of time and kids who in many cases have a shortage of attention.
It's a very good audience to have. Who you're trying to reach. And so you're making it so that it's understandable and easy for them to access.
Exactly.
How is like evidence and reason important in addressing these kinds of questions as opposed to other ways of addressing it? How do those play in?
Well, it's really important because especially people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, they claim that Christians specifically, that we believe what we believe based upon blind faith, without evidence, and without using reason. So it's really important to go back to what, from a Christian context, what the Bible actually does. The Bible does present evidence. Matthew's continually talking about the prophetic proofs for Jesus being who he claimed to be. You have Paul reasoning with people in Athens, starting where they are, but intellectually engaging them. You have to always begin with where they are. And so the Bible actually presents a case where we're looking at nature, we're looking at prophecy, we're looking at revelation, we're looking at history, we're looking at Jesus's miracles as proof. And we're told to use our brains, not just blindly believe. Jesus spent a lot more time demonstrating who he was than proclaiming who he was. It was a logical conclusion that people reached that Jesus is, in fact, God, that Jesus is, the promised Messiah. They reached a reasoned conclusion, and we should be able to do the same.
That's powerful because as people argue against the reality of God, and they say there is no God, if they are using, illogical conclusions and thoughts, they need to see that. I think we need to see that. We can't accept what they say simply as truth because, like you say, they say it loud enough and frequently enough. If they have PhD behind their name, that doesn't mean it's true, and frequently illogical.
Absolutely.
In the research you've done and the readings that you've completed, do you find that atheists kind of start out with this presupposition that God doesn't exist? Like when they start their argument, like God doesn't exist, therefore we must start here, like totally live. Do you find that to be true, or do they ever bring God into the equation?
Yeah, I would kind of categorize it into two terms. One is, what is the reason for these people embracing atheism to begin with? Okay. So, back when, I was in my early 20s learning how to tell people about Jesus, we were told to always start with people based upon where they are, right? And then you learn about them. You find out their story. You gain an understanding of what they currently believe. And then from that point, you then, explain, teach, lead them to Jesus. Okay, that's kind of what you do. And then you deal with objections along the way. So the thing I found was interesting was that there are so many reasons why people have embraced atheism. And so with the post-World War II crowd, it was substantially the pain and suffering in the world. They just saw World War I. They just saw World War II. They just saw the senseless deaths of millions of people. And how could God allow that to happen? You also in that crowd had a lot of people embracing atheism because of Marxism. And what was surprising to me was that's actually true in England. So people like Alistair McGrath, who's now a world-renowned theologian, he had embraced Marxism in his youth because intelligent people just simply didn't believe in God. And, kind of the whole new Marxist wave was going to be replacing, superstition with reason. And Antony Flew and a variety of others. Christopher Hitchens was actually a Marxist in his youth. And I think he probably still had Marxist, I guess, leanings upon his death. But Marxism was big because it really held tightly to the whole idea of atheism. But you also see things, with modern people, like Ted Turner several years ago said that he refused to believe in a God who would allow his sister to die. That was probably 20 or so years ago that he had said that. And I understand that he has become much more open over the years, and I hope that he now believes. But I just think he's an example of, some people don't believe in God because they were disappointed that God didn't answer their prayer. But in all, when you look at it, there's about 8 or 9 really key, very different reasons. Disappointment in Christian leaders. They were hurt by someone or disappointed by someone who is a believer. And you even see that in the Old Testament. It talks about, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, your poor witness. So there's a variety of reasons why people became atheists. And then after they become atheists, a lot of them do exactly what you basically presented, is they then say, okay, atheism is the default starting point. You now must prove that God exists because atheism says that there is no God. You claim that there is, therefore you must prove it. So which I think is disingenuous, because if you're really trying to seek truth, atheism is a hypothesis. Theism is a hypothesis. Why don't you honestly seek to identify and find truth together instead of just, thinking that it's, all about winning an argument, which it's not. If we're really interested in truth, we'll all pursue it kindly, gently, patiently, honestly. And so some do take a relatively dishonest approach. Others are actually pretty open. So it's a very mixed bag. So you really have to understand who, that person is, and you have to understand where they're coming from as to know even where to begin.
That's a good point. And along with that idea of, and I think you've mentioned it before, is that idea of respect, that
Yes.
idea of just having a conversation. How important is that, or to this whole process of just engaging with those who claim atheism? Well,
people aren't going to listen to you if they don't think you care about them. If you don't care about them, why would they? Then it's about winning a point. It's about winning an argument. It's about a debate. But if I genuinely care about them, I will earn the right to talk to them, and they'll see my motives, and they will listen. I had a friend years ago who claimed that I refused to believe in God, and he had a variety of different reasons. This is almost 40 years ago. And, I just consistently was his friend. I consistently loved him. I consistently sought to live a life that was consistent with being a Christian. And over time, between, I guess, my influence and the influence of other people, his kids went to Christian college, and, he's a conservative believer, and, he's a really, really committed Christian. But it takes time sometimes.
It's not just an immediate fix. It's not an answer that diffuses the situation. It's just time and care.
Well, one of the great examples from the book is a gentleman named Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew is actually a Methodist pastor's son in England. He went to British boarding school, as kind of all smart kids do. And he then encountered the ideas of naturalism, Marxism, and a variety of other things. By the time he was 15, he had embraced communism. He had rejected the idea of God. And he, as he describes it, was well on his way to becoming the most notorious atheist in the world. And for about 50 years, he was. He wrote is a piece called Theology and Falsification, a little essay, probably the most widely quoted atheist essay of 50 years. But after 50 years of being an ardent atheist, the author of Atheistic Humanism, the textbook, it was the witness of a philosopher at Oxford who patiently, kindly reasoned with him over a more than 30-year period of time with evidence and reason, kindness, and patience. And after 50 years, Antony Flew changed his mind.
Wow.
Pretty crazy.
That lends some perspective too, that it's the long game we're in.
And if we care about people, if we truly care about people, we will view it as a long game.
True. I think and that's a really good point, is it really starts with loving others and caring about them, and genuinely grieving over the fact that they are rejecting a holy God, and who actually wants them to know salvation.
Well, I keep thinking about the verses in Ezekiel. It's, why will you die, O house of Israel? Turn and live. I don't take the pleasure in any who die. It's like it's God's imploring them, and then Paul in Corinthians, he's talking about, we're like ambassadors, basically imploring people on God's behalf, to be reconciled to God. And it's like God pursues people. God loves people, and he does it through us. Okay. We just have to be willing to be part of the equation.
It's true. And we need to see God for who he is, and our job and our calling and our mission for what it is. I think sometimes our pride gets in the way sometimes, or I think maybe we feel threatened, and maybe we want to have the right answer.
Well, and in some cases, the person may be pretty unpleasant to be around. They may be pretty harsh. They may be pretty opinionated, obnoxious, and insulting to you, but you love them nonetheless.
That's true. And that's what we're called to do.
But the book was a lot of fun to write. There were some chapters that were especially fun. The chapter, is responding to the idea that more wars are fought in the name of religion than anything else, because you hear that constantly. And so just for giggles, I thought, well, United States, about 90% of people here believe in God. So we're fairly religious. Okay, so if religion is really the biggest cause of war, then most of our conflicts should have been caused by religion. Mm-hmm. So I went to the FBI crime reports for 2013, and I looked for crime related to religious bias. And the number was so small as to be almost unrecognizable. It doesn't happen. I mean, the numbers are so unbelievable. They're not even a fraction of 1%.
Wow.
Okay. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll look at, ancient history. Mm-hmm. And I love history. So I went back and I read multiple Roman historians. I read Appian's Foreign Wars. Okay. So, and I took a look at 900 years of Roman history just out of curiosity. And the Foreign Wars book was very interesting because Appian didn't mention a single foreign war in the history of the Roman Empire that had anything to do with religion.
Wow.
None. Suetonius mentioned nothing. Tacitus mentioned nothing. So here you're looking at these, and Eutropius' abridgment of Roman history, the span of Roman history from its beginning, none were fought over religious ideas or their desire to advance religion. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, what about the entire span of history? Mm-hmm. And so then there's a book called the Encyclopedia of Wars, and some gentlemen took a look at it and basically inventoried all the known wars from the beginning of time. And I'll try to see if I can remember the number off the top of my head here. But it was something like 7% of all wars and roughly 4% of all war deaths in the history of the world had anything to do with religion. And again, that's one of these things that is repeated so many times that people just kind of accept it, but it is so far from reality as to be laughable.
Yeah, I had no idea. I didn't, I have heard that frequently, and it doesn't feel right.
No.
But not having any data behind it, that's fascinating.
But the contention is it's not just nonsensical. It's not true.
Yeah.
Blatantly not true.
It doesn't hold up to the facts.
No, not at all.
Wow.
But there were a lot of things like that I found to be really interesting as I kind of dug into the book. And I loved the people's stories of former atheists. And Antony Flew was one of them. Madalyn Murray O'Hair's son was one of them. So here she was like one of the most notorious atheists in the United States because, her lawsuit went to the Supreme Court and basically got, mandated prayer removed from public schools. And it was her son, William, who was the student, who was the plaintiff in the case. And her son, William, saw atheism up close and personal. She founded, Atheists, American Atheists. She was the head of the organization. And after decades of kind of living in the middle of atheism, he changed his mind. And one of the reasons why he changed his mind, which is amusing and sad all at the same time, is he saw his own mother's life. And he saw the people who were at the core of the movement. And his conclusion was, I know there's a devil because I've seen him in so many of the people I know. And then he concluded, wow, if there's a devil, there has to be a God. So he then started to pray. He had been struggling with alcoholism, was in a 12-step program, and he actually acknowledged God as a higher power and started praying. And guess what? He started getting answers, I guess, because he got free from alcohol, turned his life around. And then he had like a dream, which is, I thought, very interesting, because in the middle of his dream, he saw an angel that was slicing his dream open with a big sword. And on the sword, it had basically the same saying that Constantine, proclaimed as he was advancing again in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, in this sign conquer. Wow. And so he was going, what is that? And he wasn't sure, but he knew that he was supposed to go buy a Bible. So he went to a department store that was open all night, found a Bible, read, I believe it was the Gospel of Luke, and said, it's true. And he became a Christian.
Wow.
But the thing that was so interesting about these people's stories were, in some cases, it was science alone that caused them to believe in God. In other cases, it was like, in a way, a miraculous experience. In other cases, it was, the whole idea of moral law, and that there truly is a universal good and evil. But of the 10 people that I included, they all had different reasons. They were all very smart people. And I think it's indicative of the fact that when we do talk to atheists, that we do need to know their stories, because it will be something different for all of them. You don't know what the obstacle is until you talk to them. But when you talk to them, then you find out what the true issue is with them. And if you can reason and present whatever that thing is to them in a loving way, you can change their lives.
Wow, that's profound. And yet very straightforward, anyone listening to this can apply that in their lives and in their conversations.
But the thing that it does require something of us. It requires us to want to engage with the person. It requires our patience. It requires our kindness. And in some cases, it requires us to prepare ourselves for the conversation. So, you're willing to invest for that person. This isn't the book that I was planning to write, but it's the book that I needed to write because I couldn't find it. And, this has been kind of a 3-year adventure for me. I wasn't planning to do this, but sometimes you have to love other people enough to invest 3 years of your life for them. You look what Jesus invested for us. Can't we just do something for someone else?
Yeah, we are called to love, to serve the Lord wholeheartedly, to love our neighbors as ourselves. I know, in my own experience, there are many things I'm happy to do for me, but how many things am I willing to do for other people out of service and out of love and out of gratitude for the very salvation I've been given?
Well, and it's like, are we also, we're willing to love people in ways that we want to love them, right? But if we're supposed to love people with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? Don't forget your mind. And don't forget that they have a mind. In some way, the best way to love them is to engage with their mind, engage with their objections, engage with the things that they're struggling with. And in some cases, they're going to blow smoke at you. And you won't know what the real issue is, until they trust you, and then after being a part of their life for a period of time, they will trust you. They will talk to you. They will engage with you, but you have to have credibility and you have to have trust. And so, I've sent copies of this book to a lot of my former colleagues at work, very bright people. They've got MBAs from Harvard and they've got Juris Doctor's degrees, and a lot of very, very bright people. And it's like, unless I'm willing to engage with their minds, I'm going to have no credibility with them. And unless I was really good at what I did at work, I would have no credibility with them. So it's like your whole life is witness. It's how you do your work. It's how you do everything. And they're watching you. And they'll only listen to you if they see your life lining up with your message. So it's been a lot of fun, and now we're kind of seeing some of the fruit of it. It's been interesting. YWAM is going to be using it as part of their evangelism training in Texas.
Oh, wonderful!
Chi Alpha is using it as part of their outreach at Rutgers in New Jersey.
Wow!
And so it's really cool to see what's happening with this.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can definitely see some fruit from the work, and just
Absolutely.
really hitting a need that is out there.
Yeah. And again, the book is introductory. Okay. So it is not intended to be, this exhaustive book about apologetics. It's supposed to be the first book that they read about apologetics. It's supposed to be the book that gives them initial answers and whets their appetite for more.
Gives them that taste, gives them some information, but in a very easy to access way.
Right.
With some real information to real questions that atheists are stating and throwing out there. So it sounds very user-friendly.
Yeah, it's incredibly user-friendly. I actually wrote it, again, with the key audience in mind of being 18 to 22-year-olds, because I have 5 kids. And as I was writing it, most of them were in that age group. Okay. And these are actual conversations in many cases I've had with my kids. And I tried to write the book as a conversation.
Okay.
So it's a conversational tone. The average chapter is about 4 or 5 pages.
Okay. So nice snippet, just a short chunk.
Exactly. And then I included a test audience.
Okay.
And the test audience included, people from a variety of different age bands, but I had 10 test readers, which I actually rewrote things, cut out chapters for that test audience. And again, to make it just as absolutely accessible as possible. Because if they're tripping over words or tripping over chapters, then you need to take it out.
Absolutely. Because you're trying to, in meeting your audience, you want them to get it. You're in that same way. You are loving and caring for your audience.
You are, because you're writing it for them. It's not the book that you want to write. It's the message and conversation you want to have with them.
That is true. It is. Well, Patrick, this has been a wonderful conversation. For our listeners, if they want to know more about you, where to find your materials, where would you like them to go?
Well, they can get the book, of course, on Amazon.com. They can get on Barnes & Noble, any of those major book websites. Also have a website called thingsatheists.com. And I include additional blogs on there of additional topics that I did not cover in the book.
Okay.
And then just my personal background is on there. And I also, at the publisher's request, set up patrickprill.com. Not that I personally think that I need to be, touting myself or anything, but people are curious about what your background is. So I did include that. And there's a variety of interviews and things like that on that site as well.
Excellent. So for everybody listening, we will put that in the show notes so you can access that there. That way you can get the book, follow Patrick, and really get equipped for conversations that if you haven't had them, you're going to have them. And so just being able to give a reasonable response and at least understand where they're coming from too. So that's powerful.
My encouragement will also be, if you don't have, kids in the 18 through say 25-year group, please get a copy and give it to your youth pastor and your college minister, because the number of them that don't have the equipping that they really need for these subjects would be surprising. Many fortunately are, but many are not. And they need these kind of simple, easy, user accessible tools to convey the message to that age group.
Definitely. So if you're listening, for you, for your college pastor, high school pastor, equip yourselves, equip your families, equip your churches, because we need it. We definitely need it. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. This was a gift. I had a great time. So thankful you joined me.
Well, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.
Wow, great conversation with Patrick. Three things that jumped out at me. First is the arguments that atheists put out there and the way that he has documented them, what he has researched. The fact that what they're saying is not well researched. What the atheists are saying is not logical. In fact, it's quite nonsensical. However, they're saying it very loudly, very angrily, and they're doing it frequently. So just because it's loud, angry, and frequent doesn't make it true in any capacity. Second thing, people won't listen to someone who they think does not care about them. So building that relationship with non-believers goes a long way. The third thing is just really to understand the stories of atheists. When we talk with them, learn what the true issue is with them. What's sort of that key piece to their story that is driving them towards atheism or away from God. So check out Patrick, thingsatheists.say.com or patrickprill.com. It's a great book. Check it out. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review for us wherever you listen to podcasts. Doing so will help others to find us. Check out the show notes for resource information. We encourage you to do that for links and other references. We'd like to hear from you, so you can message us your questions or comments on Facebook, Instagram, at Entrusting the Faith. You can email us at info@entrustingthefaith.com. If you go to our website, which is www.entrustingthefaith.com, you can sign up to our email list and receive free resources as well as upcoming podcast episode information. So check it out. Lastly, just remember, legacies are built a day at a time. So start now.